This video is to explain the features in Zone Manager. Zone Manager is what you tap on when you go into the quilting interface screen, and you would want to tap on it before you would tap on Optimize and before you would place your zone, because if you go in there after doing those things, you will have to do them again. You lose whatever you do in Optimize and your zone placement by going into Zone Manager. So we're going to tap on Zone Manager, and it gives you that warning that lets you know if you've already placed your zone that you will need to replace it. So yes, we want to go in there again. So when you go into Zone Manager, you see your entire quilt displayed. If you have beginnings, you'll only see your one zone, which is 1 or 2 rows. So if you were in beginnings, you wouldn't see anything else. You would just see that, and you would only ever have zone 1. But if you have Pro, you see the entire display of your quilt, however many zones that it is. Under zone selection, this tells you what zone is selected, and you can see zone number 1. If you look real close, there's a little red 1 there, and it's obviously the darker blue, and then the green line surrounds it, so that's the current zone selected. You can either tap down on the arrows, or you could touch your screen, and by touching your screen it would select that zone. And as you tap on each one, you'll see the red number of that zone. So we know this quilt will have 5 zones to quilt. And whatever zone is selected, when you tap on OK, that is the one that will quilt. So we're going to tap back on the first zone. Up in the top left, there's a Show Zones, and it may or may not be selected, but when you select it, you're able to see these 2 little gray lines. And really what the gray line is doing, it's outlining a zone, but because this is a nested design, the zones literally overlap each other. So this upper gray line is where the top stitches of the zone below hit, so that would be like the top stitch right there, and then this lower line here, that's where the lowest stitches hit for the zone above. So you can see that's the lowest stitch, so that's where that gray line is. That is one way that you are able to tell where your center zone placement is if you lose your spot. It would be based on this upper gray line and the very center. So wherever the very center is, and you could manually measure that on your quilt if you needed to. So you could measure to that spot, and then by looking at the design and where this top gray line is hitting at, you could actually figure out your center zone placement just by using this. You could also use your top left corner by looking at the left edge and then the corner there of the top gray line, because this spot right here would be your top left corner, and then using the top gray line over here, this would be your top right corner. So that would be a way you could use this to help place your zone placement if you lost it. And up at the top, this is the magnifying line. So if I tap on that, it blows it up really big. So I can blow it up however big, and that way you can move it around if you place your finger on the screen to get it to exactly where you want it. So that's a nice feature to have there. So we'll bring it back to the normal size there. So that's what this zone selection over here is, just showing what zone is selected. And when you need to resume at a a zone further down, if you've been quilting on a previous day, then you would want to come into Zone Manager and you would want to select the zone that you need to begin with. Now, if you were to forget and not know which zone you needed to start back with, then if all of the zones are alike, you have to watch the first zone and the last zone, because you might have this particular one doesn't have a partial row at the top, but if it did, you'd have to watch for a partial row there or a partial row at the bottom. But if you didn't know if it was, say, zone 3 or zone 4, you could even start with zone 2, as long as if the rows are alike, or you know that you're starting the correct row to follow the one you've already stitched. So kind of have to watch that if you've got two different rows, like if one is flipped or something. So that's how you use the zone number. And then next is zone sizing. So this is for a rolling rail frame, which means it's not a hoop frame. So you're always able to quilt 100% of your width, because you're able to go from the far left side to the far right side without any issue. Now, as far as the height goes, you're not able to do 100% because you wouldn't want your machine to bump into the back or bump into the front. So it has to be a less percent, so that allows for buildup on the take-up rail as you continue to quilt and advance your quilt on the rails, because that height, your quilting space height, is going to start decreasing with every time you advance your quilt. So when you tell QCT what kind of long arm machine you have, it gives a default of this percent. Now you can change it just by, you can tap on that and then you can enter a different number if you want to. But keep in mind that this amount right here is the inches that will you'll have to quilt in based on this percentage number. So just to show you, if I were to change this to 90, then it changes it to 18.9, because this is the inches reflected on 90%. So I'm going to change that back to 95, which is a recommended amount for a QCT 21. If you had a QCT 15, this would be 90, and that would be the default that QCT would fill in. So the 107, that is actually your safe area amount. That's what's entered in your safe area. So if you need to change this percent, you can. Nothing stops you. Just measure and make sure that the inches that get displayed here are the actual inches that you have, because QCT is going to think that this is the amount it has to quilt in, and so that you definitely want it to be able to stitch in the inches that it thinks it has. Okay, here we have our zone preferences, and this is a toggle. So by tapping, you change it between being center placement or 4-point. When you have 4-point selected, that means you have to select the top left corner. This is when you're in your quilting interface screen. You would move your needle to the top left corner. If you were just starting out in the first zone, then it's easy to tell where is that top left corner. It's the intersection of where you want the leftmost stitches to hit and the topmost stitches to hit. So that's it. This is the only corner you have to place. When you place the top left, you're given the choice of placing the top right. Once you place the top right, you're given the choice of placing the lower left, and then the choice of placing the lower right. But just know that the top left corner is the only corner you have to place with this placement. Okay, so when we tap on it and change it to center, then when you get through with a zone, then the machine is going to move to the very center, and that's that the center of that top gray line we talked about. But the machine will move to that that center spot, and that's what you'll mark, and then that's what you'll be using for center placement. And same with the 4-point. When you would get through quilting a zone and tell QCT to give you the zone placement marker for when you advance and put your next zone, QCT will move to the top left corner, and you'll have choices. At this point you would be not in Zone Manager but in Quilting Interface, and you're able to tell QCT to move to the other corners if you need those marked. Okay, so the next choice down here is Zone Start Position. If you have beginnings, this is grayed out. It's not a choice. When you advance your quilt to do a new zone, it's always going to start stitching from the left. If you change it to alternate and you have Pro, then that means this zone, when it begins stitching, is going to start right there on the left. Then when you advance your quilt and you're ready to stitch zone 2, and you can see it in very faint gray there, there's the number 2. But when you advance your quilt, it's going to start stitching from the right and come down and back across. And then when you get to this zone, it's going to start on the left. So it's alternating which side it starts on with each zone. Not each row, but each zone. So this would be a left start, this would be a right start, left start, right start. When you have it set for sew from left, each zone is going to start there on the left side. And then our next choices are sewing direction. This first selection says uniform. That means each row is going to start stitching from the left side. So if we were to select this one, uniform, and say OK, and go back into the quilting interface screen, then you would see a blue line right here. You would see a blue slanted line to right there, meaning when this row stitches, then QCT needs a way to get back over here. So you need to tie that off at the end of that row. Otherwise, you're going to have a big blue jump stitch back to here. So that's your choice of when you would want to have every row start from the left. The next choice is back and forth. So that means it's going to start over here on the left and it's going to finish this row, and then there'll be a jump stitch from here down to the next row, and then it'll stitch back across. So however many rows fit in your zone, that's what it's going to do. It'll sew across, jump stitch down, sew across, jump stitch down. And then your third one is continuous. And that means the rows are going to stitch in a continuous line. You're going to have the first row stitch, it'll stitch a straight line down, and then it'll stitch back across, and if a zone could accommodate 3 rows, it'd stitch another straight line down and then stitch back across. So that's how continuous works. So you need to be good that it has the straight line stitching. And you can look at the pictures and get an idea of what each one does. So you can tell that this one's going to go back and forth, and that one's going to go back and forth but with the straight line stitch. If you want further explanation, you can tap on Help. You can scroll down here and it will explain your choices. You can also tap on the little question mark in blue, and that will further explain the choices there. So for each of these, you have a group of explanations for each of these choices. So that's how this screen works. And when you've got everything set up like you want, then you're able to tap on OK, and then that takes you back into the quilting interface screen where You would make sure you have your settings like you want. If you need to optimize, and then place your zone. And this was the 4-point where I tap this pointer would be the equivalent of where a needle was being placed. So you would tap there, and then you can see how B opens up, that you can tap it, and then you can lock in the amount that you entered, or when it's not locked, then where you want the top right corner might not be exactly the exact total width you have entered. So this kind of stretches it to the exact point you want. So that's just a further explanation of the 4-point. So I hope you found this video helpful.